Ever hit that refresh button like crazy, praying a website doesn't crash during a huge sale?
Or maybe you're wondering how some companies just seem to explode in growth overnight.
We're diving into the secret sauce today, cloud native and serverless architectures. And before you click away thinking this is tech jargon, trust me, this stuff is changing how the entire digital world is built.
It really is foundational.
We're going to break down what these architectures actually are, why they matter to you, and how they're used to create some seriously impressive stuff. To help us navigate this world, we've got Kamyar Shah, a veteran in business and tech. With over 25 years of experience in a bunch of industries, Kamyar's seen it all. He knows how technology can either make or break business. Kamyar, welcome to the deep dive.
Glad to be here. You're absolutely right. This is a fundamental shift in how we think about software, about building for the future.
So let's unpack these buzzwords. Cloud native and serverless. I'll admit they sound a little intimidating. Can you break them down for us, like in plain English?
Absolutely. Imagine building a house.
Okay.
Traditionally, you lay the foundation, you build the walls, you do the plumbing,
Ah,
everything from scratch.
yeah.
Cloud native is like saying, what if we built this house to specifically take advantage of being on a mountaintop? Incredible views, strong winds for natural ventilation. We work with the environment.
Okay, I'm already picturing a pretty amazing house here. So where does serverless fit into this? Is it as literal as it sounds?
It's more about shifting responsibility.
Yeah.
In our house analogy, it's like having a dedicated team handling all the maintenance, the utilities, even the security. So you just focus on enjoying the house, customizing it to your liking. You're not bogged down by the day-to-day, just the end result.
So instead of managing servers and infrastructure, it's all handled behind the scenes, letting you focus on actually building your product or service. That sounds incredibly freeing for businesses.
Exactly. And this freedom, it translates to a whole host of benefits. Benefits that can revolutionize how businesses operate and compete.
And when we talk about benefits, I think a lot of listeners are probably wondering about the bottom line. How do cloud native and serverless architectures actually translate into, business wins?
Okay, so think about it this way. Imagine you're running an online store. Suddenly your product goes viral.
Okay.
Everyone's talking about it, sharing it, and your website traffic explodes.
Yeah.
Now, with traditional setups, you'd be panicking, right?
Right.
Scrambling to add servers, praying your site doesn't crash under the pressure.
Been there. It's not pretty.
Yeah, right. But with cloud native and serverless, you've got this built-in elasticity. Your infrastructure can automatically scale up to meet that demand, handling those traffic spikes without breaking a sweat.
Wow.
No crashes, no lag, just smooth sailing for you and your customers.
So no more 3.00 a.m. emergency calls to the IT department because the website's gone haywire. I can definitely see how that's a win for everyone. But let's talk costs for a second, because I know a lot of people just assume that running everything in the cloud has got to be expensive.
That's a common misconception. While there are costs associated with cloud services, you have to think about it differently. With cloud native and serverless, you're essentially shifting from a fixed cost to a variable cost. You're only paying for the resources you actually use, kind of like your electricity bill.
Okay, so instead of investing in a bunch of hardware up front, hoping it's enough, you're paying for what you need when you need it. That makes sense.
Exactly. And don't forget about the reduced operational overhead. Since the cloud provider is managing a lot of the infrastructure for you, you're freeing up your own team so they can focus on innovation and developing your product, which ultimately delivers more value.
It's sounding more and more like cloud native and serverless are the way to go, especially for businesses that really want to stay competitive. But to really drive it home, can you give us some real-world examples of how companies are using these architectures to their advantage?
Absolutely. We see this all the time. Think about companies like Netflix or Spotify streaming massive amounts of data to millions of users concurrently.
Yeah.
They're able to do that seamlessly because their infrastructure can scale on demand thanks to these architectures.
That's a great point. They're not limited by physical servers in some data center somewhere.
Exactly. And it's not just for tech giants either. Think about a small startup developing a new mobile app. With serverless computing, they can focus on building the app itself, getting it to market quickly, and then scaling their backend as their user base grows without having to make massive infrastructure investments up front.
It's amazing how these concepts can be applied across such different industries and scales. I'm particularly interested in what you mentioned earlier about serverless computing, how it allows developers to focus purely on a code. It sounds almost too good to be true.
It is a powerful concept, and it's all about breaking things down into smaller, more manageable pieces. Think of it like building with Legos. With serverless computing, you're breaking down your application into these individual functions, each one performing a specific task, and each function is triggered by an event.
So instead of having one massive application, you've got these smaller independent functions all working together. What are some of the events that would trigger these functions?
It could be anything, really. A user uploading a file, a new entry being added to a database, even a message being received from another part of your application. And the beauty is, you only pay for the compute time the function uses.
Okay.
So if it's not being used, you're not paying for it.
That's incredible. Are there specific platforms that are built around this serverless idea?
Absolutely. Platforms like AWS Lambda, Azure Functions, Google Cloud Functions, these are all major players in the serverless world. They provide all the tools and infrastructure you need to build and deploy these serverless applications.
Okay, so we've got these individual functions triggered by events running on these serverless platforms, but I imagine that even with all of this being handled for you, managing these complex systems could still be a challenge, right? It does sound like a lot to juggle, especially as your application grows and you have more and more of these functions interacting. How do teams even begin to manage that complexity?
That's where some key concepts come in. Microservices, containerization, orchestration. These might sound intimidating, but they're really about making things more manageable.
Okay, so let's break those down. What are microservices in this context?
Think of it this way. Instead of having one giant monolithic application, you break it down into smaller independent services, almost like building blocks. Each microservice has a specific job. Yeah. And they communicate with each other to make the whole system work.
So kind of like how a car has different systems, engine, transmission, brakes, all working together.
Exactly. And just like with those car parts, if one microservice needs an update or has an issue, you can address it without taking the entire system offline.
Okay.
This makes your application more resilient and easier to maintain.
That makes sense. But how do you ensure that these microservices, these building blocks, are portable and run smoothly across different environments? I'd imagine that could get tricky.
You're right, and that's where containerization comes in. Think of containers like those standardized shipping containers you see on cargo ships. They provide a consistent, self-contained environment for your microservices. So they can run smoothly anywhere, whether it's your laptop, a testing server, or in the cloud.
So it's like packaging up your microservice with everything it needs to function, so you don't have to worry about compatibility issues. What about orchestration? What role does that play in all of this?
Orchestration is like the conductor of an orchestra, making sure all these different microservices are working together in harmony.
Yeah.
Tools like Kubernetes help automate the deployment, scaling, and management of these containerized microservices, especially when you have hundreds or even thousands of them running simultaneously.
Okay, so we've got these microservices packaged neatly in containers, and we've got orchestration tools keeping everything running smoothly. This is starting to paint a clearer picture of how these complex systems operate, but let's be real. Even with all this talk about efficiency and optimization, I know a lot of our listeners are still thinking about cost. How can businesses make sure that they're getting the most bang for their buck when it comes to cloud native and serverless?
You're hitting on a crucial point. Cloud costs can definitely sneak up on you if you're not careful. One of the biggest mistakes businesses make is over-provisioning, essentially paying for more resources than they actually need.
So, like buying a giant truck when all you need is a compact car.
Exactly. It's about right-sizing your resources. Cloud providers offer tools to help you analyze your usage patterns and identify areas where you might be overspending. You can then adjust your resource allocation accordingly to optimize your costs.
Right sizing. I like it. Are there any other cost-saving tips you can share?
Another big one is data transfer costs. Moving data between different cloud regions or services can add up quickly. So think strategically about where you're storing your data and try to minimize unnecessary data movement.
And I imagine choosing the right storage options can make a difference too, right?
Absolutely. Not all data is created equal. You've got your frequently accessed, mission-critical stuff that needs high-performance storage. But then you've got data you need to keep for compliance or archival purposes that isn't accessed very often.
Right.
Cloud providers have a range of storage tiers with varying costs, so it's about finding the right fit for your needs.
It's all about optimization, finding those areas where you can be smarter with your resources.
Right.
But even with the best tools and strategies, we have to remember that technology is only part of the equation, right? What about the human element? What skills and cultural shifts are needed for companies to really thrive in this cloud-native serverless world?
You're spot on. You can have the most cutting-edge technology, but without the right people and mindset, it's not going to get you very far. One of the biggest shifts is embracing a culture of continuous learning. Cloud technologies are constantly evolving, so it's essential for teams to stay updated and be willing to experiment with new approaches.
So, fostering a culture of curiosity and adaptability, what else is important?
Collaboration is key. Those traditional silos between development and operations teams just don't fly in this world.
Right.
We need to break down those barriers and foster a DevOps culture where teams work together seamlessly throughout the entire software development lifecycle.
DevOps, it's about agility, communication, breaking down those silos. It's about embracing automation and streamlining processes.
Exactly. And it's about creating an environment where experimentation is encouraged. Cloud-native and serverless architectures, they make it easier to test new ideas and get rapid feedback, so you can iterate quickly and learn from both your successes and your failures.
It's amazing how much these concepts are reshaping not only how we build software, but also how teams operate and collaborate.
It's a fundamental shift, and it's exciting to see how these technologies are empowering businesses to be more agile, more innovative, and ultimately more successful in our increasingly digital world.
Kamyar, this has been an incredible deep dive. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today.
It's been my pleasure.
And to our listeners, thanks for joining us on this journey into the world of cloud-native and serverless architectures. We hope you've gained some valuable insights that you can apply to your own work and businesses. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.